Well, hey there, friend, and welcome back to the My Adoption Coach YouTube channel. I am so glad that you decided to join us today because today you are in for a real treat. We are having a conversation with Michelle. Michelle is an adoption attorney in the state of Illinois, and she's going to walk us through the entire process to adopt a child in Illinois and give us an overview of the adoption law so that you can get a baseline understanding of what's allowed and not allowed in the state of Illinois. My name is Amanda, and I'm an adoptive mom on a mission to help hopeful adoptive families remove the overwhelm and avoid unnecessary expense in the adoption process. I do that by sharing courses that teach you everything from how to pick which type of adoption is right for you to the step-by-step process for each different type of adoption, as well as creating and sharing your adoption profile using my 20 plus years of marketing experience. If you haven't already done so, I sure would appreciate it if you'd take just a minute to hit that subscribe button and ring that bell so that you'll get notified each time I release a new video. It really helps the YouTube algorithm gods know that you found this content valuable. And if you didn't, send me a message and let me know how I can help you in your adoption journey. All right, let's dive right into our conversation with Michelle. Thank you so much for joining us today, Michelle. We're so excited to have you here.
Oh, I'm excited to be here.
Oh, well, we are just so thankful that you are willing to share more about the adoption process in the state of Illinois with us. Can you start by sharing just kind of a broad overview of what adoption law is like in your state?
So, for me as an adoption attorney, I really think that our adoption laws are fairly easy to navigate and pretty, I don't want to say standard because every 50 states have different adoption laws, but I would say that most of our laws are fairly consistent in that if you were to do a bell curve, we are, 72 hours before a mom can actually sign her paperwork. I always tell my clients it's going to be more than 72 hours. Okay.
Yeah.
People hear 72 hours and they always think, oh, they're going to stick a sheet of paper underneath her nose at 72 hours. I'm like, she has as much time as she needs to decide. That might be, 74 hours. That might be 2 weeks. It might be 2 months. And in addition to that, the truth of the matter is if a baby's born at 9:00 at night, there is no social worker that's going to, or judge, who's going to take that signature at 72 hours at 9:00 at night, nor do they work on Saturdays or Sundays. So I always tell people to expect more time than 72 hours. And I always, when I'm representing expectant moms, I always tell them they can take as long as they want. And they should take as long as they want because it is a very serious decision. When it comes to birth fathers, it gets more complicated because it depends if it's a legal father or a putative father. Men can sign before the adoption or even before the baby is born because there are reasons that we want to be able to get them early and they may leave, right? So we may not be able to find them after the baby's born. So there are different ways that we can have them sign ahead of time. Or they can also sign after 72 hours. Or if they're not signing, there are ways to terminate their rights in court if they are not stepping up to be the father of the child, right? So obviously, birth fathers have rights and they have the right to parent their children too, but they have to do something about it, right? They can't just say, oh, well, I don't want this to happen. Because if that occurs, then we as lawyers are going to move forward to terminate their rights. I would also say the thing that people should know about Illinois, we are not an agency state, but in much of the state, we operate like an agency state.
What does that mean?
So you're not required to use an agency in the state of Illinois, but life is easier when you use an agency.
Yeah.
So as lawyers, many of us will guide people towards agencies. Now, the first thing that people think is, oh, that's so expensive. But we have what's called agency assisted. And when we do an agency assisted adoption, it is far cheaper than what you hear for agency fees. So when people hear agency, they're thinking, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000. When I say agency assisted, I'm talking probably somewhere between $5,000 and $7,000.
Wow.
But they will actually wrap around all the social work that I, as a lawyer, cannot do. Right.
Yeah.
So they wrap around all the social work. They will, if the expected mom needs to be taken to public aid to get on the medical card, they'll do that. If she needs help understanding what's going on in preparation or counseling, they'll do that. They can actually because they are licensed child welfare agencies, they can actually take the surrender, the consent, and witness it or actually take it, depending which document we're talking about, to terminate biological parents' rights. They can work on terminating the biological father's rights before the baby is born. Sometimes they work with us as lawyers, but they wrap around all those services. And then if it is a family within the state of Illinois, they will also do the home study and the post-placement, which of course I can't do.
Right.
So I either have to have them do it or I have to send it to a government entity to do it. And generally speaking, most of the agencies are a better choice for most people who are going through this adoption process. Now, if you are downstate, sometimes they do things a little bit differently than we do up in Cook County, the Chicago area. But basically, for most of us, we will kick the social work to one of the adoption agencies that do assisted adoptions. And I personally think it's better for everybody involved,
Yeah.
right? I mean, I know that as a hopeful adoptive parent, people get excited. They want this to happen. And they don't want anybody in the way, right? They hope that it moves forward in a very positive way without anyone being in the way. But the reality is this is a huge decision. And you want the woman who signs her rights away to be certain about what she's doing.
That's right.
Because if she's not, it is going to be your headache. That's what I tell my clients, because the reality of the situation is there really aren't any closed adoptions in 2023. No. You might operate like there's a closed adoption, like you may not be talking to the birth family, but everybody knows who everybody is.
Right.
You know, they picked you out of a book or on a website with all your information. It's not that hard to find people, right? Yeah. So if she is not confident in her decision, I'm not saying happy, but confident in her decision, she's going to call you. Yeah. She's, you know, and so you want her to be confident because it's the right thing, not only for her, but for the child too.
Absolutely. I have so many questions. Thank you. That was so helpful. There's a couple of terms I want to go back and just break down for our audience as it relates to the definition of a legal father versus a putative father. Can you kind of share a little bit more about that?
A legal father is someone by statute who is declared to be the father. So a husband, for example, a husband is a legal father because if you are married to the mother, it is irrelevant whether you are actually the birth father, the biological father or not. If you are married to the mother, you are the legal father.
Yeah.
But there are other instances where someone might be a legal father too. So for example, if a man is at the hospital and signs the birth certificate and he's on the birth certificate, he's a legal father. If a man 2 weeks later signs a voluntary acknowledgement of paternity, he's a legal father. If this isn't a child welfare case, they often do DNA, or a man will walk into the court and he will sign something and the judge will enter an order that he is the father. He is the legal father, right? So a putative father is a man that someone says he might be the dad, but in no way has he been in any court order or any statute to be made the father, right? Gotcha. He's just the guy out there who might be the dad.
Yeah.
So the way we treat this is very different. So with a legal father, we really have to chase them all down if we have a name. Mm-hmm. But a legal father has different rights than what a putative father has until a putative father establishes himself as a legal father. Gotcha. So, but in any case, we have to give them all notice, right? And we in the state of Illinois do have what's called a putative father registry. Not all states have a putative father registry. In most adoptions, when we're talking about a domestic infant adoption, and most of what I'm going to be talking about is a domestic infant adoption, unless you actually ask me a separate question, because I also do child welfare adoptions,
Okay.
international adoptions, adult adoptions, step-parent adoptions, grandparent adoptions, but I'm trying to stay in the domestic infant adoption lane.
Yeah.
So with regards to a domestic infant adoption, now I lost my train of thought.
You were talking about putative father registry.
Okay. Putative father registry. So we in the state of Illinois have a putative father registry. With the domestic infant adoption, usually what we will do, because the match is made before, in most cases, made before the baby is born, is that either the lawyer or the agency will check the putative father registry to see if the man has put, or any man has put his name on that registry. Because if he does, then he's entitled to notice. Okay. The man actually has up to 30 days after the birth of the baby to put his name on the registry. So we will then check again on the 31st, 32nd day to make sure that, we've cleared that 30-day period. But you don't want to wait to 30 days afterwards if he put his name on the registry at 6 months when she was pregnant, right? You want to know that there's a guy out there that's concerned that this might be his child, and that he's entitled to notice and has something to say. And until there's a DNA test done, you don't really know if it's his child or not. Based on the circumstances, you may have a good idea. But certainly having been an adoption attorney for decades, sometimes they think it's their kid. Sometimes the mom thinks it's his kid and it's not.
Yeah.
So, at that point, I would always want a DNA test.
Yeah.
Because you might be fighting a guy that isn't even your father.
Yeah. That's super helpful. You touched on two different terms. I just want to make sure we break down for the audience that they're super clear as it relates to an adoption agency and an agency assisted adoption. So do you mind, just for the audience, to kind of break down the differences again between those two options?
So usually when you talk about an agency adoption, you're talking about a traditional adoption where you go to the agency and the agency more or less does everything from A to Z, right? They start you out with the home study. They look for an expected mom for you. They make the match. They do all the paperwork, all the surrounding social services, which might include counseling for either the adopted parents or the expected parents. They take the signatures on the paperwork. They do the post-placement after the adoption. They do the report that is going to need to go to the court, and you pay a fee for that, right? Yep. With agency assisted, sometimes also called agency identified, the match is made elsewhere. So either you have a self match, or maybe you use a consultant, a facilitator, which may or may not be legal, but you use a consultant or a facilitator, or, the match comes because a friend of a friend said, so-and-so's pregnant, or, you learn about it through some other means that I wouldn't call it necessarily a self-match. It is a self-match, but you weren't necessarily looking for it, right? It sort of drops in your lap. So with those types of adoptions, you want to we would use an agency-assisted adoption that wraps around the services, right, at a far substantially less expensive situation than you would with an agency adoption that does everything. Some people also use marketing services. So they use the agency for the social work services, and they use the marketing services to do the match. Marketing services, facilitator, consultant. I mean, these terms sort of overlap depending who's using them and why. In the state of Illinois, we have very specific rules whether you can do that or not. And to my knowledge, there's only one facilitator that is left. Well, two, I think, that are left in the state of Illinois, and they have actually abided by the rules or the laws that DCFS has created to exist. all the other facilitators have ceased to be. There used to be more.
Yeah.
So
that is super helpful. So just because I know our audience oftentimes ask in our community over on Facebook, the My Adoption Coach community, they ask a lot about self-matching. And I know that it's hard to paint a broad brush. And I know that in this episode and by watching this, we're not, creating any sort of attorney-client relationship. It's purely for informational purposes only. I should have mentioned that at the top of the show. But can we spend a little bit more time talking about really, just as you said, facilitators and marketing agencies and all of that, when it comes to self-matching, what is allowed in the state of Illinois? Are they allowed to share via, friends and family that they're hoping to adopt? Are they allowed to use Google ads or Facebook ads? Or, are there any hard and fast rules that are really spelled out that they need to follow, of course, with the advice of their hired adoption attorney?
So they are allowed to advertise, but there are specific rules of who can advertise, right? So the potential adoptive parents can advertise, but not anybody else can advertise. Licensed child welfare agencies can advertise. Anybody that's been, like, the facilitators approved through DCFS, which is our Department of Children and Family Services, or our child welfare department that actually oversees the licensing of all child welfare agencies, whether they do DCFS adoptions or not, they're allowed to advertise. The statute is, you can go read it. It's sort of long, but, there are specifics. But in short, hopeful adoptive parents or potential adoptive parents are allowed to advertise. And they are allowed to advertise on the internet. Anyone is always allowed to, talk to friends and family, those types of things. Your pastor, your rabbi, your school counselor. I don't really think, for the most part, that's how people are making connections anymore. Yeah. But you can do that. The real issue comes in is when money starts getting exchanged.
Right.
Okay. So for the most part, as long as there's no money exchange, it's fine. But the minute you start hiring somebody, you need to find out if it is a legitimate way to do it or not. Yeah. And it gets complicated because the matches can happen. The reality with the internet is that you're matching with people anywhere across the country, right? Mm-hmm. And so there are certain states that you're just not going to be able to work with. And there are other states that you can work with, and it may be legal in their state, but not legal in your state. So depending upon what the lawyers have to say, you might be able to complete the adoption in that other state versus this state. When people do adoptions across state lines, they really need to get adoption professionals in both states. Those two adoption professionals need to have a consultation, because most of the time when I have clients that there's the possibility of two state laws, there are so many factors to decide whether it's better to use my state or a different state, right? Yeah. And I don't know the other 49 states' law off the top of my head.
Of course.
So realistically, I need to talk to an adoption professional in that state. And, we do a consultation and we figure out, what are the rules for terminating the biological mother's rights? So in my state, as I mentioned earlier, it's 72 hours, at least 72 hours, but we don't have a revocation period. She can wait as long as she wants. So if she's not ready, she should not sign, and she can wait 2 weeks, 2 months to sign. But once she signs, she signs, right? Mm-hmm. Where in other states, she has time to change her mind after she signs, right? So that might make a determination of whether we want to sign in Illinois or another state when another state's involved. Ours is 72 hours. Some states are 96 hours. Some states are right after, baby's born. Some states are longer. You have to figure that out. How we terminate biological father's rights. Does she have to name the biological father? In my state, for example, expectant mom she has to fill out a form called the Affidavit of Identification. Mm-hmm. On this form, she lists who the father is, but she has the option to not list him. Some states require that the mother list him. So she can either say, yes, I know who he is. Here's his name. This is where you find him. Or maybe she knows who he is, but doesn't know where to find him. Or she may be able to say, I don't know who he is. That would include circumstances like rape,
Mhm.
someone who prostitution, someone who has multiple partners in a short period of time and really just doesn't know which guy is the dad.
Right.
There's a variety of circumstances where she literally may not know, or she may have been drugged with roofies and she doesn't really know how she got
Yeah.
pregnant. There is a whole host of reasons she may not know. Then there's the option where she can say, yeah, I know who he is, but I'm not telling you who he is, right? And usually those are cases, in my experience, domestic violence is high. I'm not telling you because he's going to beat my behind. Or you may get the situation where I told him and he told me do whatever I want to do to keep him out of it, right?
Yeah.
And so that's exactly what she's doing. So we have that option here where she can choose. So that might be beneficial for her, as opposed to a state that requires that she named the guy. There are other things too, how long it takes to complete adoption, how we give a father notice, when we can give a father notice. And we're comparing both states. We're comparing, and then we get into the practical stuff. You know, how much is it going to cost?
Yeah.
Right. So, how much will it cost to do it in one state versus the other state? Do you have to travel to that state?
Yeah.
What is the cost on that? Do you have to travel to the state twice? Because some states require you come back for finalization, other states do not. Then you're talking about things like what are the cost of the lawyers, the cost of the agencies? Do you have to get an agency involved? Is the agency a complete agency assisted, or is it just witnessing? So like some states, when I have an agency witness an Illinois consent, we'll charge $200, $300. It's not a big deal, right? Other states are like, oh, well, if we're going to witness a consent, I need $6,000. So then I might make a decision. It's better to, get this person into a judge. Because we can have our consents witnessed before a judge too. But then that also depends on how quickly you can get into court. So even if she's willing to sign in 72 hours, if you can't get into court for, a month, that doesn't help you, right? Then you have to hire someone. So we're figuring out all those logistics to make things practical as well as legal with two states involved. And then on top of that, of course, we have to comply with the ICPC. ICPC is the Interstate Compact Act. And in short, whenever a baby leaves one state and goes to another state, the sending state, the state they leave, has to say, yes, you may leave the state. And the state that is receiving the baby has to say, yes, you may come into this state, right? And so parents need to understand they're going to have to stay in that sending state until they get the okay to leave. And it's a host of paperwork that has to be given to the state's interstate compact offices, and they review everything, and then they send it to the other state and they review everything from the hospital records to the home study. If it's an older kid, it may include therapy reports and a variety of other things. They also want statements on legal risk, meaning if the father has not signed off, the parents know there's a legal risk. If the child has a medical risk, for example, if the child's been born with substances in their system that may possibly later cause developmental delays, the learning delays, they want the parents to know that. So they have them sign off on that. In our state, we actually have a adoption and medical exchanged registry. So they want the parents to know that when the child is older, they can put their name on that registry and there can be a match. And that is also part of our state allows adoptees to get their original birth certificate at the age of 21. So in order to get your original birth certificate, you have to put your name on that registry. So things like that is all, can be laid out in the Interstate Compact Act if you're crossing state lines.
Yeah, that is super helpful. I think it would also be helpful for the audience to hear the full example. So I've picked up on a couple of threads as we've gone through is that, she can file 72 hours plus, or excuse me, she can sign her consent 72 hours plus. And again, weekends don't count in that, right? And be cognizant of the hour of the day and, all of those types of things. But then she can decide 2 weeks, 2 months, etc. But once she signs, it is irrevocable. Is that correct?
Correct. It is final and irrevocable, except, of course, there's always an exception, right? So we now have in our state what's called designated consents. And that's where she specifically names a specific family, right? We also have designated surrenders. I'm going to stick to consents at the moment. Surrenders are through an agency. A consent is witnessed by an agency. But a designated consent, the expectant mom would say, I am consenting to the adoption of my child by Jennifer and Alan, for example, right? And as long as the adoption goes through with Jennifer and Alan, it is final and irrevocable. Prior to that, we had general consents that it was always final and irrevocable. In this case, if Alan and Jennifer do not complete that adoption, right, then she is entitled to notice and she can withdraw her consent. Because she may be specifically like, I picked Jennifer and Alan. That's the only person or the only people I want to raise my child, right? And if they're not going to do it, then I'll do it. Or I want say in who the next family will be if this family has backed out for some reason. With newborns, I think in 3 decades, I think I've seen 2 families back out. I mean, it's not common. The adoptions move forward, but it was as the adoptions became more open. So previously, if you go back decades ago, there were no open adoptions. The agencies made all the decisions. The adoptive parent, the expectant mom didn't know where her child was going except to a home study ready family through the agency, right? But then open adoptions came about and self-matching really came about. And there were expectant moms, or by the time they signed moms, who were saying, well, I'm signing this paperwork terminating my rights. How do I know that Jennifer and Alan are getting my baby? I picked Jennifer and Alan, but how do I know I can trust you that they are the ones who are getting my baby? And so then the lawyers got together and created a new consent called a designated consent that says Jennifer and Alan are going to get your baby. And if, they don't, then you are entitled to notice. So that would say that's the one exception. And since it's been created, I've never had anyone back out. Like I said, in 3 decades, I've only had 2 families I can think of that changed their mind after the baby came home. So it's just, but it's there, and it is there to reinforce with the expectant mom, her choice is being implemented.
Okay. So since the consent is final and irrevocable, is that the same as finalization, which is a word that we hear in other states?
It is not. So the consent is final and irrevocable, but that is the mom and perhaps the dad, depending how we terminate his rights, whose rights are terminated. That is not the court finalizing. So when we say finalization, that's when the judge enters an order that says you are the parents of this child. In the state of Illinois, traditionally, it has been 6 months of post-placement. Depending upon the agency, you'll get 3 to 6 visits after the baby has been placed, and then they will send a report. I personally usually schedule my adoptions for the most part to be finalized at 7 months because of the paperwork. Right? Because the agency has 6 months to do the post-placement. I can't really turn around the paperwork to the people who need it at the courthouse on that 6-month day. So I schedule it at 7 months and tell them to get it to me at 5 months. And hopefully get done somewhere in that 6-month mark. But there are other people involved. So when we go to court, we have a guardian ad litem, which is appointed for the child. So that person, which in my court is always a lawyer, that person will review all the paperwork. So they have to review all the paperwork even before the judge reviews the paperwork at finalization time. And so I know there is, you need that paperwork time. I also know that because I am one of the appointed GALs in Cook County. So the way it works in my county, which by the way is the biggest county in the country, the way it works in my county is that we have to apply to be a guardian ad litem for the adoption court. And that is different than the juvenile court, by the way. That's a different set of guardian ad litems. But in the adoption court, we apply. We have to get interviewed by the chief judge. We get appointed for certain terms, and then we are assigned based on the case number, right? So it's a random assignment based on whatever the case number is spit out by the computer system. But I know that I have to get everything to the judge at a certain period as a GAL. So, I am courteous to the other GALs so nobody's in a cramped position.
Yeah. That is super, super helpful. That's not something I've heard in other states. So that's really interesting to hear. So we've talked about how, she can sign the consents and how he can sign the consents and the timing of that. And then the finalization. The other thing that I think, aside from the process, that I think is always helpful for hopeful adoptive families to hear and understand the importance of, that we've touched on a couple of times, but I want to ground in one other way, is having an adoption attorney as your partner in this. I often caution our community that supporting an expectant family throughout the adoption process can, sometimes put your opportunity in jeopardy. And it depends upon your definition of support, of course, but in most cases, the exchange of monetary value can definitely put an adoption opportunity at risk. Do you mind to just briefly touch upon kind of the regulations around this? And then, of course, the importance of having an adoption attorney walk you through that for your specific case?
Sure. So every state is different in if you can pay fees and how you can pay fees. So in the state of Illinois, it's basically not 120 days before the date of birth and up to 60 days afterwards, right? So depending where she's pregnant is how you can pay fees. However, how you pay it is very specific. So we have what's called reasonable fees for the expectant mom and the baby is in the statute. That is, there is nothing in there for the father, by the way. It's just the mom and the baby.
Yeah.
And then although it's not specific, over the course of time, those fees basically mean rent, food, anything medical, of course, utilities. I mean, it's helpful if she has a phone and you can get in touch with her. You want her to have electric and gas so she's not freezing her butt off in the middle of the winter. Things like that. We cannot pay for education. We cannot pay for her other children's daycare. We cannot pay for travel, for example. I worked with a case a while ago where the expectant mom, she didn't want to rent. She just wanted a trip to Norway. And I'm like, I cannot pay for a trip to Norway. It's just not happening. So it's very specific what reasonable fees are. Transportation may or may not be included. Usually, I mean, we're in a urban suburban area, so there's usually buses and trains and so on and so forth. There might be a different decision made if you were in the middle of a very rural area, but with what transportation means. So it's very specific with regards to how we normally do it. There is a small limit that they are allowed to pay so that, like, if the adoptive parents go out to lunch with the birth mother, they can pick up her hamburger, right? Because obviously, I mean, you don't want to make her pay for the lunch. That's ridiculous. But you don't want to go over that fee amount. So when it comes to expenses, one of the reasons that I love an agency assisted adoption is the agency will take care of all those expenses. So you pay the agency will then meter it out as it should be metered out. And with experience, we've all learned it's better to pay the landlord directly than to pay her. Very, very early in my career. This is a long time ago. I had an adoption. We made the mistake of paying her directly. This was back to give you an idea, this was back when rent was $400. And so this expectant mom got her $400. She was already a parent. And the first thing she did was take her 6-year-old to McDonald's, right? Because she wanted to give her child something that she doesn't normally get.
Yeah.
Well, the problem was she then only had $394 left for rent. And the landlord wanted $400.
Yeah.
So that's why, we pay the landlords directly. We pay the utility company directly. For groceries, we let her do her own grocery shopping. But, we want to make sure that there's a roof over her head and food in her belly. It's highly debatable whether, I realize that in the adoption community, some people think that expenses should not be paid. But I've been doing this long enough to know there are expectant moms who are living in shelters, living in their cars. And that's not the healthiest thing for an expectant mom. So who's going to pay the expenses is what it really comes down to protect her health and the health of the baby. In the state of Illinois, I should also point out that once you pay those expenses, those legal expenses that the lawyer has said it's okay to pay, or your agency has said it's okay to pay, you should think of it as a gift, right? You cannot get them back. If she changes her mind after the baby is born and says, you know what, I want a parent, or I'm going to pick another family, those expenses are gone. Now, you might be able to prosecute if she's been getting expenses from 2 different families. That would be fraud.
Right.
Good luck in getting a state's attorney to take that case, but it happens. But, it's not an easy thing to prosecute. But at the same time, it's just, you as a hopeful adoptive parent, you should set your budget that you are not paying for stuff that you cannot afford, because there is no guarantee. And hopeful adoptive parents need to understand there is no guarantee until she actually signs those papers. And moms think they want to do this and change their mind. They're not even trying to defraud you. They really think they want to do this and they change their mind. As to your second question about a lawyer. So getting a lawyer involved early can do a couple things. First of all, if you're really at the beginning of the process, an adoption attorney, and by that, I mean someone who specializes in this area. I do not mean someone who advertises they're a family lawyer and really they do divorce.
Right.
Based on the area, I mean, if you're in the middle of a rural area, your lawyer is more likely not to necessarily specialize in adoption because they'd never be able to make a living. So you might be going to a family attorney. But if you're in Chicago, I think there's about 8 of us now that are, this is what we do, right? Is adoption or assisted reproductive technology law. So with going to an adoption attorney, generally we know our local landscape, right? We know which agencies are out there. We know which agencies will work with single parents, will work with people who are not Christian, who will work with people who are LGBT, who will work with people who are of color. We know who those agencies are. We know we might have a decent idea about the wait time, the fees. We know who is less likely we know their personality is the word, I guess I would say, right? Because some agencies are very structured. It's almost like a checklist. You do this, 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 right? And other agencies are much more personal in their approach and a little bit more individualistic. I would say that it depends upon the parents, meaning the hopeful adoptive parents, which agency is better for them specifically. So some people really need that structured environment that there is, you just follow what they tell you to do and that works for you. Other people need a lot more handholding.
Yeah.
Right. And so once I talk with parents, I am more likely to say, okay, this is better for you than that. Right. Or if I have, for example, Latino family, I may know that this agency tends to place more Latino kids. So you want to go to this agency if you want to have a racial match. So things like that, your lawyer probably has a much better idea And also your lawyer may know resources. So for example, in Chicago, we have what's called CAFA, or Chicago Area Families for Adoption. And CAFA actually has a conference coming up in about 2 months. There's first time back after post-pandemic, for the term that people are using. But one of the things I love about CAFA, and if someone calls me at the right time of year, I will tell them to go to this conference, because for the most part, all the adoption agencies are there. So instead of going to, agency A on Wednesday night of this month and agency B on Thursday night of this month, and then making a phone call to agency C, and then, going to agency D on a Saturday, you go to the one conference and you go table to table to table, and you can get all the different fees and personalities and what services they offer. In addition, you get a full day of adoption education. And so the conference only comes around every other year, but if you hit it right, it's a great time to go. And it's continuing. It counts towards your educational hours. If you go to the conference, right? Because in my state, you need so many educational hours if you're adopting a domestic infant adoption. Yep. So with rare exceptions. So, it's a convenient thing to know. So your lawyers know that. Then your lawyers can also assess with you. So like I will do a consultation with my clients or potential clients and try and figure out, what do they want? Right? Because people will come in with all sorts of ideas. They will have seen stuff on the internet that may or may not be true. And then we can sort of narrow that focus. Is your best route a domestic infant adoption? Is your best route an international adoption? Is your best route child welfare? Yeah. Here are the pros and cons of all these different routes. And in my opinion, each family needs to figure out what's best for them. There is no best route, right? It's the best route for that individual family. And, if you come into my office, for example, and say, we really want to adopt a 7-year-old, domestic infant adoption is not the way to go, right? That's a newborn. Let's face it. The chances of getting a 7-year-old through domestic infant adoption is like next to nil. So I'm going to either guide you towards international or child welfare. Right. That's just an example. But people don't realize that. They think they're going to go to an adoption agency that does domestic infant adoption and get a 7-year-old. Yeah. Right. So the lawyer can guide you where to go. And in some cases, very rare cases in Illinois, some of the adoption attorneys will actually do matching. I don't do matching, except in rare cases, because I'm mission driven with those matches. And I feel very strongly that expectant moms who are in marginalized communities should be able to see families that look like them, right? Yeah. So on rare occasion, people will call me and say, including agencies, and say, hey, I have a Black birth mom and she wants a Black family, and I'm connected in that community as well as the interracial community. And then I can do a match. And, I'll look in my file drawer of who I have that's waiting. But I don't actually match in general. That's because I'm mission-based. I also have a connection in the Muslim community. And so, I've had people call and say, hey, we need a Muslim family for this expectant mom. And so I'll be like, okay, I know who to call, and we'll make that happen, right? And that happens in communities that are marginalized. But other than that, I am not a matching attorney. There are some that do it, though. There are attorneys who match across the country. And so I might actually tell somebody, you know what, you can do your adoption in Illinois, but I want you to use this lawyer in a different state because they do matches. Or I want you to use this agency in a different state because they do matches. But again, I don't know all 49 states other than Illinois. I know my territory really well, but ultimately, I have clients who have used other agencies or lawyers across the country. So you start to build relationships. Some places, you know a lot about, some places you don't.
Yeah. Well, this has been so helpful. Thank you so much for giving us the overview and kind of the deep dive, and then the examples, and then really things to consider and think about. How can our audience find and get in touch with you?
So the best way to get in touch with me is through the phone, 312-857-7287. You can also look at my email, which is hugheslaw@mindspring.com. You can actually generally Google Michelle Adoption Attorney, and I will be all over the first page. And then the other way you can do it is I am a member of the Academy of Adoption and Assisted Reproductive Adoption Attorneys, or more commonly referred to Quad A. So if you go to their website and search Illinois attorneys, there I am in the Chicago area. And last but not least, our state DCFS, the Department of Children and Family Services, actually has a list of licensed attorneys that they work with on their website because we have been pre-approved to do the DCFS adoptions. I'm there too. So all of those places you can find me or how to get in contact with me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again, Michelle, for joining us today. We really appreciate your time.
I appreciate being here. Thank you.
Wow, wasn't that conversation with Michelle just amazing? Michelle really touched on a lot of topics that'll really help you get a baseline understanding of your adoption journey. But most importantly, I think she helped you understand, or I hope she did, the need for an adoption attorney in your adoption journey. So if you want to reach out to Michelle, I'll have all of her information in the show notes. If you're still trying to get started in your adoption journey, remember I have a 3-step process to make it easier for you. The first step is to determine which type of adoption is right for you. And we use the Finding My Adoption pathway to help you go through the critical decisions to determine which type or types are really best for your family. The second is to really follow a proven step-by-step process so that you can avoid unnecessary time and expense in your adoption journey. And we do that inside the private adoption program, where I literally walk you through the step-by-step process with videos and PDFs and all the resources that you need for your adoption journey. And the third step in the process is to help you create and share your adoption profile so that you can make an emotional connection with an expectant family. If you want to learn more about all 3 of these, head on over to myadoptioncoach.com to check them out. I'll see you soon, friend.